Sean Diddy Combs isn't just fighting for his freedom, he's fighting to hold on to his fortune. Forbes now estimates his net worth is $400 million, a significant drop from the $740 million valuation just a few years ago. But that number could shrink even more. Federal prosecutors are moving to seize assets tied to the alleged criminal activity, and if convicted, Combs could lose everything from luxury properties to his music rights.
Sean Diddy Combs, the man who personified limitless success, is facing a debt crisis so profound it has rendered his vast fortune a legal illusion. The shocking truth, now confirmed by financial analysts tracking the public record, Diddy's entire fortune has vanished in a firestorm of debt, with legal documents revealing he is functionally out of money and facing total insolvency.
Once considered a billionaire with a vodka line, a TV network, and a clothing brand, Sean Combs' fortune has taken a major hit. Forbes estimates his net worth is roughly $400 million, nearly half of what it was just a few years ago. Both his Beverly Hills and Miami mansions were raided in March of 2024 as part of the investigation into his alleged crimes. And that number may continue to drop as Combs faces a federal trial and a Justice Department forfeiture action that could cost him his empire. An empire that prosecutors allege was built, at least in part, through a pattern of criminal activity, including alleged sex trafficking, drug distribution, and violence, all used to advance what they call a racketeering enterprise. In the unsealed indictment, prosecutors outline how his business and personal assets allegedly played a role in carrying out or concealing the crimes. This means any assets connected to the behavior, even indirectly, could be seized, including real estate, companies, vehicles, and aircrafts. Now, his $60 million private jet has reportedly already been sold. The Beverly Hills estate is currently on the market for $61 million. And while Combs still owns his $48 million Miami mansion, a judge denied his request to use it as collateral for bond. In week 2 of testimony, Homeland Security Special Agent Gannon took the stand. Gannon, who helped lead the March raids of Combs' homes, walked jurors through photos of the items seized. Among them, parts of AR-15 style rifles with the serial number scratched off, loaded magazines, a Gucci bag reportedly filled with ketamine and MDMA, and personal items like lingerie and dozens of bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Prosecutors say this evidence is critical to establishing the elements required under federal racketeering laws, helping them show a pattern of alleged crime, criminal behavior used to sustain or conceal the enterprise. In an effort to protect what's left of his assets, Combs hired Stefan Casella, former deputy chief of the Justice Department's asset forfeiture and money laundering section, to fight the forfeiture action. If the jury finds Combs guilty, it will be up to them to determine how much of Combs' assets are subject to forfeiture. Anything forfeited after a conviction could be used to support alleged victims. Sean Combs denies all allegations. And to help us break down what's at stake, I'm joined by Jim Trusty. He's the former chief of the Department of Justice, Organized Crime and Gang Section. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure. Good to be here.
So, Jim, let's start with the forfeiture. This isn't just about prison time anymore. Prosecutors want his empire. From what you've seen in the filings, how aggressive is this?
Well, it looks to be very aggressive, and there's a couple of reasons I say that. The first is it's very broadly worded. What they're talking about is essentially any property, real or personal, that could constitute either facilitating property or instrumentalities, they call it, or proceeds. And so that's kind of the whole business empire of P. Diddy being at risk. And that's the second part, which is it's a RICO case, a criminal enterprise case, where they've defined the organization, the criminal enterprise, as not just Sean Combs, but as all these business interests that he has, including liquor labels, music labels, everything else you can think of. So they've set it up in a way where when they get to a forfeiture phase, if there's a conviction, the sky's the limit, and it looks.
For 2 decades, Diddy cultivated the image of the billionaire impresario. His net worth reached a towering height, estimated at over $800 million just a few short years ago. That number was anchored almost entirely by his celebrity status and his massive, recurring income stream from the Diageo partnership for Ciroc Vodka and De Leon Tequila. But the moment the first lawsuit hit, and the devastating criminal charges followed, The foundation of his business, his personal brand, became commercially radioactive. The financial collapse was not gradual, it was immediate and catastrophic. The initial, fatal blow was the irrevocable end of the Diageo partnership in early 2024. Despite any settlement he may have received for his DeLeon stake, Diddy simultaneously lost the vast, multi-million-dollar annual revenue stream that cemented his high net worth. This single event, coupled with the forced sale of his majority stake in Revolt TV in mid-2024 and the disappearance of the Sean John fashion line from major retailers, caused his estimated net worth to plunge by over half, settling.
I mean, in the context of racketeering cases, you tell a much more complete story in a RICO case. You don't just focus on a particular moment in time or a crime. You tell the whole story of this criminal enterprise, which lends itself to big forfeiture moments. And so it's not totally unusual to see it this broadly worded. What I think is a little unusual is it's not very specific in terms of any preliminary seizures. It looks like they haven't actually seized anything yet, even though they executed search warrants and looked for evidence of things. And so a lot of times you'll see listings in there of bank accounts, automobiles, jets, whatever, that the government has already preliminarily seized to make sure it's still going to be available at the time they do a forfeiture hearing. So this one, it's a blank slate. And it's blank enough where if you're the defense attorney and you get to this next phase, which, by the way, is supposed to be with the same jury. They may not know that yet. But that second phase would be one where you really would say to the judge, I don't have any notice here, Your Honor. This is so broadly worded. I need to particularize it, have a chance to digest it, and perhaps bring in expert testimony on both sides about kind of legitimate sources of income versus illegitimate ones.
And you mentioned that, they're also linking his company. So maybe that's his, record studio, or maybe that's, his vodka line. But how does something like a vodka line, how can that potentially even be mixed up with this? How can they say that that's linked to an alleged crime?
Yeah, it's really one of two or maybe even three ways. One is if there's somehow a tie-in where that property, that business was used to facilitate the freak-offs that are in the indictment, for instance, or obstructionist behavior. So if they literally used a record studio for a party and the record studio belonged to one of his companies, you could say that actually facilitated or was an instrumentality to support the criminal conduct. The other way is essentially if it is a proceed, if it was essentially built on money that comes from illegal activity. And then thirdly, and this is where it gets really crazy confusing, so I'll keep it short. Sometimes there's something called substitute assets where the government says, okay, we realize that particular asset, that car, that piece of art was not actually bought by proceeds or served to contribute to the crime. But because we can't find enough to satisfy the overall amount we're owed, we're going to take it as a substitute asset. It's a very government-friendly area, this whole idea of federal forfeiture. And again, I think they're in a position where they might have their mitts on almost anything he's ever touched.
And how do they decide just that number that they're looking for? Is there kind of like a flat out number that the government, when charging with these types of cases, that they say, hey, we're looking for 50 million, we're looking for 60 million? How do they decide how much?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, that is an easier task in some circumstances where you have a fraud situation where you can tell the amount of victimization and say, well, look, it adds up to 2.5 million, and they put that in the forfeiture indictment. They don't have that here. In a drug case, for instance, you might say, well, they were responsible for 10 kilograms of cocaine. A kilogram's about 30,000. So we're looking for 3 million, do the math. Here, it's much more wide open. I think you're looking at an actual trial within a trial, if we get to the forfeiture phase, where there's going to be experts saying this is money that's untouched by any sort of criminal enterprise from the defense side, and maybe a forensic auditor from the FBI saying, here's why we're entitled to all these types of proceeds or instruments. So it is a wide open battlefield. It's going to be kind of a textbook example of how deep the government tries to reach for forfeiture if they get to that point.
At what point does that kind of strategy from prosecutors become legally risky for them, though?
That's the thing. I mean, the court of public opinion every now and then turns on forfeiture. And, the idea of forfeiture is that you don't want people to not just
around a current, conservative estimate of $400 million. Attention, this is the ultimate, cold-blooded financial execution of a modern mogul. A story that strips the facade from celebrity wealth and exposes the devastating bottom line. Sean Diddy Combs, the architect of Bad Boy and the self-proclaimed billionaire, is facing a debt crisis so profound it has rendered his vast fortune a legal fiction. The shocking truth, now confirmed by financial analysts tracking his court-mandated disclosures. But here is the catastrophic reality. The $400 million figure is a mirage. It represents illiquid assets, luxury homes, art, and his music publishing rights. It is not cash available to cover the immediate, multiplying threats now closing in. The true metric of his financial state is the staggering gap between those illiquid assets and his enormous, court-driven liabilities. The most aggressive financial drain is the insatiable demand of his legal defense to fight his federal conviction for
get away with crime, but profit from it. Being criminally prosecuted and put in prison doesn't mean that you've lost the assets. And so the idea is to kind of make things even, to hold people accountable, to not let them profit from criminal activity. But over time, you see abuses. You see situations where a person barely had a role in some sort of criminal conspiracy. I mean, literally was on the job for one day and is ordered to forfeit millions of dollars. And that bubbles up to the Supreme Court, where they say this is just not totally fair. So there are abuses of the forfeiture system that are seen from time to time. I think, look, if P. Diddy, if Sean Combs is convicted in this case, I don't think he's going to necessarily gin up a ton of sympathy. But there may be legal observers that say, hey, this is a broad, overreaching moment, when they try to collect every single penny that a guy who obviously had legitimate income over long periods of his life.
And for those that do say, hey, isn't this just a financial overreach? How do prosecutors justify that?
Yeah, I think they justify it by saying, in this case, they'll say, look, two things. Number one, we didn't disable him financially pre-trial. We haven't actually locked into his accounts and taken things and frozen things where it might even affect his ability to hire attorneys or hire experts. And secondly, they say, look, it's a criminal enterprise that extended for a number of years, that where he had financial profit from this kind of power and control over an enterprise. So I don't expect them to be apologetic. I mean, they may end up showing moments of moderation where they say, well, we're not going to go after this company or that company, but they've left it all on the table for now, where they can do a very broad, deeply reaching process if they want to.
And Sean Combs, he's already sold one jet. The Beverly Hills mansion of his is on the market for $61 million or so. Does that seem like someone who is confident that they'll walk, or could that work for or against him in court?
It's probably not going to be anything that's particularly admissible during the trial. It could come up during the forfeiture just to show that, his overall stock has dropped. I mean, I think he's down to his last 400 million. It's a real tough spot to be in. But but I think at the end of the day, you really can't draw any firm conclusions. He knows he's got a battle of his life going on right now. I mean, this is a life eligible racketeering case. Doesn't mean he'll necessarily get life. It's not a mandatory sentence. But if the facts continue to be established of years of abusive and controlling behavior, it paints a pretty dark picture for him in terms of sentencing.
And Sean Combs, he's now brought in Mr. Casella, someone who literally wrote the book on asset forfeiture. What's Casella's role likely to be here?
Well, I worked with Steph at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland for years. He is literally the expert on forfeiture. Whenever I have a situation in private practice where I have a question mark about forfeiture, that poor guy has to take my phone call. So he's a great pick. He knows what he's doing. He knows both the process and the law, which can be a little bit different sometimes. I think he's probably, getting them prepared for the types of challenges. And by the way, I don't know this from him, but I would guess that he's basically figuring out what are the types of challenges we could raise in a forfeiture phase. What are the deficiencies in the government's approach? In other words, are they not discounting lawful employment by Sean Combs? And frankly, some of it could even relate to like how he's spending money right now. When you have a broad forfeiture allegation, it's kind of hard to figure out, are they saying that I can't get attorneys of my choosing because I'm using proceeds
transportation for prostitution, and simultaneously grapple with the 24+ active civil lawsuits demanding compensation that conservatively totals over $1 billion. He has had to employ the most expensive legal minds in the world. Court filings and market actions reveal Diddy has been forced into a desperate, rapid liquidation strategy just to meet enormous legal retainers and hefty settlements, such as the one paid to Cassie Ventura. The visible symbols of his panic are the properties on the market. His $61.5 million Beverly Hills estate, the infamous site of the federal raids, has been put on the market as a forced divestment to generate immediate capital, struggling to find a buyer due to the ick factor of his reputation. His private aircraft have been sold or leased to desperately raise funds. These transactions are not profitable business moves. They are the actions of a man whose liquid wealth has been entirely drained by legal necessity. For 2 decades, Diddy meticulously cultivated the image of the unstoppable, wealthy impresario. His estimated peak net worth, once soaring above $800 million.
Of criminal activity. So I think he's probably giving a lot of very sage guidance on how they walk through this process of dealing with a very broad, very deep, potentially deep-reaching forfeiture.
Since he is so knowledgeable, and since, I don't know if there's anyone who's more knowledgeable than him in this specific department, do you think that bringing him in may challenge the government's playbook at all?
I think it would certainly give them a moment of pause. Look, the reality is there's probably not a ton of time being spent worrying about forfeiture quite yet. They're probably figuring we'll get there when we get there. We got to try to get a conviction. But yeah, it's a shot across the bow. You see Steph Casella lining up on the other side, and you can say this about a lot of different type of expert witnesses and things where you say, wow, that's the king of DNA or the queen of forensic fingerprint recovery. So, I think it's a shot across the bow. They'll realize that they've got somebody that really knows their stuff on the other side, but that doesn't necessarily mean they change their approach in any way at this point.
And there's this idea of facilitating property, that a business or maybe an item helped enable a crime. How direct does that link need to be?
Yeah, we should ask Steph. but yeah, that's a great question. You have to be able to show, a significant link. It can't be just like this 6 steps removed kind of thing. Like there was a bottle of liquor that happened to be on the bar during one of these assaults, and he owns a liquor company, so therefore, the liquor we can presume facilitated the crime. You're going to have some, quantum of proof that's deeper than that. But it's very fact specific, and again, that's why I think you're probably looking. Even though a lot of times forfeiture becomes a very small afterthought to a criminal trial, this one really has the potential to be a completely independent kind of mini trial, delving into his finances, delving into issues just like that. Like how well connected can the government make these instrumentalities, these facilitating pieces of property? I think it's, inherently pretty difficult. But again, if you use a location, that's a little bit easier. If you say, I'm going to use my liquor company headquarters, or I'm going to use a record business studio to have one of these freak offs, that becomes a much tougher climb for the defense to get out of it as an instrumentality. It's these kind of third time removed ones where they might have some success.
And like how you said, we're not just talking about past behavior here. Prosecutors say that this was ongoing. Does that make asset recovery just a little bit easier for them?
Yeah, in general, I'd say yes. Because you're talking about a period of years, and you're going to have, during these trials, you're going to have very specific stories from witnesses that say, I was there when X happened at this particular location. But you're probably going to get broad characterizations too. Like he would always, use his liquor to get people drunk before these freak offs, or there were times where we met and discussed how we were going to do this at office X or home Y, or how planes were used. It might not be a specific moment, but he might have somebody that says, I was at the airport when his private plane brought prostitutes here. So you might not have the precision that you'd have with kind of a single event trial, but you're probably going to have pretty significant stories that, again, tie these properties into the possibility of being forfeited.
How much of a role does public perception play here? Have we seen the DOJ make strategic decisions based on headlines?
Well, overall, sure. We could probably point to all sorts of cases that you could, I think, fairly characterize as a little bit of trophy hunting, where the Department of Justice or even non-federal prosecutors, think this is my great case. And they like the headlines that come with it. But look, I don't think this is an example of a case that's being brought in bad faith. I think it's unusual.
Was anchored almost entirely by his celebrity status and his massive, recurring income stream from the Diageo partnership for Ciroc Vodka and De Leon Tequila. That entire foundation was revealed to be a fragile house of cards. The financial collapse was not gradual, it was immediate and catastrophic. The single most defining blow was the irrevocable termination of his partnership with Diageo in early 2024. Despite any settlement he secured for his stake in De Leon, Diddy simultaneously lost the vast, multi-million-dollar annual revenue stream that was the lifeblood of his financial standing. That event, combined with the subsequent collapse of other ventures like the sale of his controlling stake in Revolt TV, saw his estimated asset value immediately plummet to a current conservative estimate of around $400 million. But the $400 million figure is a cruel deception. It represents illiquid assets, real estate, art, and intellectual property.
Mia's feelings just in terms of why D-Rock was reaching out to her around this particular time frame, and then just kind of how it coincided with D-Rock and Diddy speaking to one another either through text or through calls to get a hold of Mia, and then Mia was just kind of, out and about and those types of things, and then eventually Diddy wasn't able to get Mia on the line and the two hadn't spoken since.
Goes to the idea of witness tampering, goes to the idea of obstruction, right? One of the underlying crimes of this racketeering criminal enterprise is the idea is after Cassie comes forward with her allegations, we got to make sure Mia's on the same page about everything. I think that's what they're trying to say, and not that he just farmed it out to D-Rock, but he was intimately involved in these conversations and trying to make sure he could get in contact with Mia because, again, what are her allegations? That she was a witness, but also that she claims she was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs. So not great, not great. You could see the importance of these messages. You can see why messages like this, including from the alleged drugs and setting up the hotel rooms and the payment and the travel, and even something like from Jane, where she basically said in a message that she was concerned Sean Combs was going to release sex tapes of her. That goes to the coercion aspect of sex trafficking, forced fraud or coercion, right? Worried about those tapes being released unless she does what he wants. How does the defense fight back against this? What did they do when they cross-examined this summary witness?
Yeah, that was kind of one of my big questions too, Jesse, because I'm like, when you're coming at people with, not coming at people, I should say, but when the government has all these exhibits and dates and text messages, and you're able to find these text exhibits through these text messages, and it seemed pretty concrete, but the defense was able to do what the defense does. And right off the bat, the cross-examination, by the way, was done by Tenny Garagos. And so the defense off the bat kind of brings up Cassie's legal filing, the way it was sent. Then they kind of get into the messages from D-Rock to Mia, where D-Rock had told Mia, he told me that he wants nothing from you, and that being he, Sean Combs, wants nothing from you, you being Mia. And then we see the message going back to February 2nd of 2024, where Mia told D-Rock that she was out of Skrilla money, and so that she had no money, that type of thing. And so what I think the defense was trying to imply was that D-Rock wasn't reaching out to Mia saying, let me know if you need something because Diddy was making him say that or anything like that. I think what the defense was trying to imply, or at least kind of poke holes in, was that maybe Mia was having financial issues, and that D-Rock, because he was opening a new restaurant, because they are just such close friends, D-Rock and Mia, that he was just sending this money to her, not because of alleged witness tampering or anything like that, but because it was just kind of a big brother trying to help out a little sister type of thing. And so the defense brought up that D-Rock sent that message to Mia saying, if you need anything, let me know. And then we see some more messages from D-Rock to Diddy from February 7th of 2024, where where Diddy tells D-Rock, I tried to reach her. D-Rock says, that's the last text I got from her, and now the phone is not even ringing. So I think what the defense is trying to also say here is that after February 7th of 2024, they weren't able to get in touch with Mia anymore. And so then afterwards, Diddy just kind of stopped reaching out to her and trying to make it seem like it wasn't more than anything besides him just reaching out to her, as opposed to maybe something, a little bit more serious. And so then the defense really kind of also talked with this particular witness, that being Sinker, the paralegal specialist, that these messages were just from an 8-year period. And so these select messages that only spanned about 33 pages long were just that. They only spanned about 33 pages long. They're not showing the full context of every single message that was sent within this long time period. And so the defense was like, this chart starts on March 18th of 2016, but Ms. Karam has been working for many years prior to 2016. And so then the defense brings up that there's only one time in this particular summary chart, or the summary exhibit, where the name Clayton.
It is not cash available to cover the immediate, multiplying threats now closing in. The true metric of his financial state is the staggering gap between those illiquid assets and his enormous, court-driven liabilities. The most aggressive financial drain is the insatiable demand of his legal defense, to fight his federal conviction for transportation to engage in prostitution and to grapple with the 24+ civil lawsuits, demanding compensation that conservatively totals over $1 billion. He has been compelled to retain an army of the world's most expensive legal minds. Court filings and market actions reveal Diddy has been forced into a desperate, rapid liquidation strategy just to cover these soaring legal retainers and hefty settlements, such as the initial, massive payment made to Cassie Ventura. The most visible symbols of his financial panic are the properties on the market. His $61.5 million Beverly Hills estate, the infamous site of the federal raids, remains actively listed as a distressed property, a clear signal of forced divestment to raise capital. His luxurious private aircraft have been disposed of or leased out to desperately generate funds. These transactions are not profitable business moves. They are the desperate actions of a man whose liquid cash reserves have been entirely decimated by his legal war. The liabilities are compounding with terrifying speed. Legal experts concur that the potential judgments from the multi-party civil accusers easily eclipse the total value of everything he still owns. Furthermore, his conviction opens the door to the federal government's pursuit of asset forfeiture, aiming to seize properties that they can prove were connected to his criminal activities, thus permanently removing his luxury homes from his possession. Adding to the immediate pressure, he was hit with a $100 million default judgment in one civil case after failing to appear in court, a staggering financial blow even if his team is fighting for its dismissal. The devastating, final conclusion, derived from analyzing his exposed balance sheets, is that Sean Combs is now financially underwater. His colossal debt load, the crippling cost of his legal defense, and his future liability from settlements and judgments have completely surpassed the remaining, depreciating value of his physical and intellectual property. The man who once ruled the world of hip-hop is now confined to a prison cell, and the very symbol of his identity, his wealth, has been wiped clean by an unavoidable legal and financial maelstrom. The collapse is total. The liabilities are compounding with terrifying speed. Legal experts confirm the potential judgments from the multitude of civil accusers easily exceed the total value of everything he still owns. Furthermore, his conviction opens the door to the federal government's pursuit of asset forfeiture, aiming to seize properties that they can prove were connected to his criminal activities, further threatening his luxury real estate holdings. The crushing conclusion, derived from analyzing his exposed balance sheets, is that Sean Combs is completely financially underwater. His vast debt load, the crushing cost of his legal defense, and his future liability from settlements and civil judgments have completely surpassed the depreciating, hard-to-sell value of his remaining assets. The man who once ruled the world of hip-hop is now confined to a prison cell, and the very symbol of his identity, his wealth, has been wiped clean by a relentless, unavoidable financial maelstrom. The collapse is final.